This is what happens inside your body when you drink black coffee on an empty stomach. With zero sugar and zero cream, nothing added at all, and most people have no idea. Caffeine, the active compound in every cup, can push your blood sugar up by 8 to 26%. Not from anything you pour into the mug. That spike comes entirely from what caffeine does to your hormones, your insulin, and your liver the second it hits your bloodstream. For anyone over 60, those numbers carry real weight. The CDC's National Diabetes Statistics Report shows that 28.8% of Americans 65 and older live with diabetes, and an additional 52.1% have prediabetes. Add those together, and roughly 4 out of 5 Americans over 65 are dealing with some form of abnormal blood sugar. And that same age group drinks more coffee than anyone else in the country. Which means the people with the most blood sugar problems and the people who drink the most coffee overlap almost perfectly, and that connection barely gets mentioned. Now, before you consider putting down your mug, hear me out. Telling you to quit coffee would actually go against the science. The National Coffee Association's spring 2024 report found that 73% of Americans over 60 have coffee every single day, the highest rate of any generation. Because the same body of research showing caffeine spikes your glucose also shows habitual coffee drinkers carry up to 33% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes in the first place. Coffee protects you over the long run while hurting you in the short run. That contradiction sits at the center of everything we are covering today. And there is a way to handle it. A simple 4-step morning routine, walk, water, protein, then coffee, can neutralize the glucose spike while preserving those long-term benefits. Every step rests on peer-reviewed research, and I am going to walk you through all of it. A drink with zero sugar raising your blood sugar sounds like it should not be possible. But caffeine pulls it off through 3 separate mechanisms running at the same time. First, caffeine floods your system with stress hormones. Heegers and colleagues published a study in Diabetes Care in 2002 using gold standard glucose clamp methodology on 12 healthy volunteers. And what they found was striking. Caffeine drove plasma epinephrine, which is adrenaline, up 5-fold while cutting insulin sensitivity by 15%. Adrenaline acts directly on the liver, forcing the breakdown of stored glycogen into glucose and the creation of brand new glucose molecules. Your liver starts dumping sugar into your bloodstream because caffeine sent the signal to do it. Cortisol stacks on top of that effect. Lavallo and colleagues demonstrated in Psychosomatic Medicine in 2005 that caffeine stimulates cortisol secretion across all waking hours. And this happens even in people who drink coffee every day. Your body never fully adjusts to it. Second, caffeine jams your adenosine receptors. Caffeine's main pharmacological action involves blocking A1, A2A, and A2B adenosine receptors. And here is why that touches blood sugar. Adenosine normally helps glucose move into muscle cells and supports insulin signaling. Once caffeine blocks those receptors, your muscles struggle to absorb glucose even when insulin is circulating. Third, caffeine disrupts insulin signaling at a molecular level. Egawa and colleagues published their findings in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2011, showing that caffeine inhibits a pathway called IKK/IRS1, which belongs to the cascade telling your cells to take in glucose. Even when your pancreas releases insulin, your cells do not respond the way they should. And here is the proof that adrenaline drives the whole process. Thong and Graham ran an experiment published in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2002, where they gave subjects propranolol, a beta blocker that shuts down adrenaline's effects, alongside caffeine. The glucose impairment vanished completely. Block the adrenaline, and the blood sugar spike disappears, which pins caffeine's damage squarely on the stress hormone pathway. One compound in coffee works against all of this. Chlorogenic acid, which coffee beans contain in abundance, actually improves insulin sensitivity. Ong and colleagues showed in PLOS 1 in 2012 that chlorogenic acid dropped fasting blood glucose by 31% in diabetic mice within just 10 minutes, activating pathways similar to metformin. That compound is one of the biggest reasons why coffee's long-term track record looks so different from caffeine's short-term damage. But in those first few hours after your cup, caffeine overpowers it. None of this is guesswork. Clinical researchers have been measuring and replicating these effects for over 20 years across multiple independent labs. The study that matters most for our audience came out of James Lane's lab at Duke University in 2008, published in Diabetes Care. Lane recruited 10 habitual coffee drinkers with type 2 diabetes, average age 63, and had them wear continuous glucose monitors during their normal daily routines. On the days they received 500 milligrams of caffeine, about 4 cups of coffee worth, their average daily glucose ran 8% higher than on placebo days. But the pattern that emerged was the real surprise. Caffeine's damage got worse as the hours passed. Glucose climbed 9% higher after breakfast, 15% higher after lunch, and a full 26% higher after dinner. The effect accumulated throughout the day. Lane followed up with a pilot study in the Journal of Caffeine Research in 2012, showing that when 12 patients with type 2 diabetes gave up caffeine entirely for 3 months, their HbA1c, the long-term blood sugar marker, dropped by clinically meaningful amounts. Terry Graham's team at the University of Guelph exposed just how dramatic the numbers can get. The Moisey study from 2008, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, compared caffeinated versus decaffeinated coffee paired with meals in 10 healthy men. Caffeinated coffee combined with a high glycemic meal produced a glucose area under curve 147% greater than decaf. Pair that caffeinated coffee with a low glycemic meal, and the difference jumped to 216%. Sit with that for a moment. If you went out of your way to choose low glycemic foods to protect your blood sugar, drinking caffeinated coffee with that meal basically erased the benefit. Graham's earlier work from 2001 revealed that 5 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine triggered 60% more insulin output during a glucose tolerance test, meaning the body pumped out far more insulin, yet still failed to clear glucose properly. Greer and Graham, also in 2001, reported caffeine reduced glucose disposal by 24% and carbohydrate storage by 35%. Robinson and colleagues carried these findings into the population that needs the answers most, people with type 2 diabetes, in a 2004 study in the Journal of Nutrition. 5 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine reduced their insulin sensitivity index by 14% and pushed blood glucose at 3 hours approximately 39 milligrams per deciliter above baseline. 2 meta-analyses tie everything together. Schur and colleagues analyzed 7 randomized controlled trials for Nutrition Journal in 2016 and confirmed caffeine significantly decreased insulin sensitivity. Amami and colleagues pooled 18 trials with 252 participants, finding caffeine increased glucose while lowering the insulin sensitivity index. And here is the cutoff that matters. The glucose effect only reached statistical significance at doses of 250 milligrams or more, which translates to roughly 2 to 3 cups of brewed coffee. That threshold is worth remembering. 1 small cup may not register. 2 to 3 cups and effects start to show. 4 cups or beyond puts you into clinically measurable glucose elevation territory. After hearing all of that, the next piece of science sounds almost impossible. One of the most consistent findings in nutrition research is that people who drink coffee habitually carry much lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Deng, Bupitaraju, Chun, Van Dam, and who published the largest meta-analysis on this subject in Diabetes Care in 2014, covering 28 studies, over 1 million participants, and more than 45,000 diabetes cases. Each additional daily cup of coffee reduced diabetes risk by 6 to 9%, and 6 cups a day corresponded to a 33% lower risk. Karlstrom and Larson verified these numbers in 2018 with 30 studies and 1.18 million people, landing on a 6% decreased risk per additional cup. And here is the clue that cracks the paradox open. Decaffeinated coffee delivers almost identical protection. Ding's analysis showed each extra cup of decaf cut risk by 6%, compared to 9% for caffeinated, and the gap between them was not statistically significant. Van Dam and colleagues found similar numbers among 88,000 women in the Nurses' Health Study, where 4 or more cups daily brought 47% lower risk regardless of caffeine content. That finding tells us everything. Caffeine is not the ingredient protecting you. The other compounds in the bean are doing the heavy lifting. Coffee contains over 1,000 bioactive compounds. Chlorogenic acid activates pathways that sharpen insulin sensitivity. Trigonelline improves insulin sensitivity in intervention studies. Polyphenol, roughly 100 milligrams per cup, tamp down the oxidative stress and inflammation that fuel insulin resistance. Magnesium and chromium in coffee support insulin function. Weddick and colleagues demonstrated in 2011 that 8 weeks of 5 cups a day raised adiponectin, a hormone that boosts insulin sensitivity, by 1.4 micrograms per milliliter. The picture snaps into focus once you see it. Caffeine is the troublemaker, spiking your blood sugar with every cup. But the other 1,000 compounds in coffee are allies, and their protective effects build over years of regular drinking. The real question is not whether to drink coffee. The question is how to drink it in a way that tames the caffeine spike while letting the long-term protection do its work. And that brings us to the protocol. Each step in this routine draws on its own body of peer-reviewed evidence. The full sequence has not been tested as a single combined intervention, but the science behind each piece holds up, and the logic connecting them is clean. Step 1. Walk. Walking after meals carries the strongest evidence of all 4 steps. DiPietro and colleagues published a 2013 study in diabetes care built around 10 inactive older adults aged 60 and over, all with pre-diabetic fasting glucose in the range of 105 to 125 milligrams per deciliter. They compared 3 15-minute walks taken after each meal against a single 45-minute walk done once a day. The short post-meal walks won, outperforming the longer session for 24-hour glucose control. Reynolds and colleagues showed in 2016 that post-meal walking brought blood glucose down 12% on average and 22% after the evening meal, studying 41 patients with type 2 diabetes whose average age sat around 60. Buffy and colleagues confirmed the pattern in a 2022 sports medicine meta-analysis, finding that light-intensity walking breaks reduced glucose by 17% compared to prolonged sitting. Even a 10-minute stroll lowered peak glucose by over 17 milligrams per deciliter. The takeaway fits in one sentence. After breakfast, walk for 10 to 15 minutes. Nothing intense, just a gentle stroll. Your leg muscles switch on and start drawing glucose out of your bloodstream. Step 2. Water. Most people underestimate how much hydration affects blood sugar, especially first thing in the morning after 8 hours of sleep with zero fluid intake. Roussel and colleagues tracked 3,615 adults over 9 years in a study published in Diabetes Care in 2011. Among those drinking at least half a liter of water daily, the risk of developing new-onset hyperglycemia dropped by 32%. The reason traces back to a hormone called vasopressin. When your body runs low on water, vasopressin climbs, and that hormone pushes the liver to produce more glucose. Jansen and colleagues reported in 2017 that dehydrated patients with type 2 diabetes had fasting glucose of 10.4 millimoles per liter versus 9.5 when properly hydrated. Severe dehydration can push blood sugar up by 50 to 100 milligrams per deciliter in people with diabetes. Carroll and colleagues from the University of Bath did find that mild dehydration did not change glucose response much in healthy adults, which means this step matters most for people who already have diabetes or prediabetes, and that describes about 4 in 5 adults over 65. When you wake up, drink a full glass of water before reaching for anything else. A small step, but it helps bring your baseline closer to where it should be. Step 3. Protein first. Alpana Shukla and her team at Weill Cornell Medicine produced the landmark research on this one. Her 2015 study in diabetes care tested 11 subjects with metformin-treated type 2 diabetes eating identical meals arranged in different orders. When protein and vegetables came before carbohydrates, the numbers shifted dramatically. Glucose at 30 minutes fell 28.6% lower, at 60 minutes dropped 36.7% lower, and the total glucose exposure over 2 hours collapsed by 73%. Shukla's 2019 follow-up confirmed over 40% lower glucose peaks in 15 pre-diabetic participants who ate protein and vegetables first. A Frontiers in Endocrinology review from 2019 reported that mixed protein-fat preloads can cut glucose absorption by 16 to 42%, which is comparable to some blood sugar medications. The mechanism behind it is straightforward. Protein slows gastric emptying and triggers incretin hormones, GLP-1 and GP, that ramp up insulin secretion. When protein arrives first, carbohydrates that follow enter the bloodstream at a slower pace, giving insulin enough time to keep up. Before your coffee, eat some protein. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, a handful of nuts. You do not need a full meal. Even a small protein portion creates a buffer for whatever follows. Step 4. Then coffee. James Bett's lab at the University of Bath produced the study that pins down coffee timing. Smith, Hengist, Thomas, and colleagues published their results in the British Journal of Nutrition in 2020 after testing 29 healthy adults across 3 conditions: normal sleep followed by breakfast, disrupted sleep followed by breakfast, and disrupted sleep followed by roughly 300 milligrams of black coffee 30 minutes before breakfast. Drinking coffee before breakfast drove the blood glucose response up by approximately 50%. Peak glucose reached 8.96 millimoles per liter in the coffee-first condition, compared to 8.2 in the control group. Professor Betts put it plainly, and I quote, "Put simply, our blood sugar control is impaired when the first thing our bodies come into contact with is coffee." Lead researcher Harry Smith added, starting a day after a poor night's sleep with a strong coffee did have a negative effect on glucose metabolism by around 50%. A 2025 pilot trial by Rio Mendez and colleagues backed these findings, confirming that coffee timing relative to carbohydrate intake shifts both peak glucose and overall glucose exposure. The practical message lands clearly. Do not let coffee be the first thing that hits your system in the morning. Walk, drink water, eat some protein, and then pour your cup. By that point, your natural cortisol surge, which peaks 30 to 45 minutes after waking, has started settling down. Your muscles have already begun pulling glucose from your blood, you are hydrated, and protein is slowing your digestion. Caffeine still arrives, but your body now has the tools to manage it. A few facts land differently once you pass 60, and they are worth covering on their own. Your body clears caffeine more slowly as you age. UCLA Health reports that adults aged 65 to 70 take 33% longer to metabolize caffeine compared to younger people. Older adults also carry proportionally more body fat, which means the same caffeine dose creates higher concentrations in the blood. The FDA's general recommendation sits at 400 milligrams per day for healthy adults. But UCLA Health suggests many older adults tolerate only 50 to 100 milligrams well, which comes out to roughly 1 small cup. On the medication side, metformin, the most commonly prescribed diabetes drug, has no established major interaction with caffeine. A 2025 Oxford academic study actually pointed toward potential synergistic anti-diabetic effects between the two. But caffeine still acutely reduces insulin sensitivity by about 15%, which means it works against the glucose-lowering effects of sulfonylureas and insulin therapy. If your blood sugar stays stubborn despite medication, caffeine could be the hidden variable nobody checked. James Lane at Duke delivered his advice without hedging, and I quote, "It would be worthwhile for people with diabetes who drink coffee to try quitting for a time and see if their glucose improves." His colleague Richard Serwitt went further, saying, "If you get your patients off caffeine, you can have a 20% improvement in postprandial glucose for free." Bone health enters the picture as well. Rapuri and colleagues found in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2001 that caffeine intake above 300 milligrams per day sped up spinal bone loss in postmenopausal women, which adds another reason to keep intake moderate as the years pass. And one detail people rarely hear: no separate FDA caffeine guideline exists specifically for seniors. That 400 milligram recommendation was never designed with older adults in mind. Not every cup of coffee hits your body the same way, and your DNA plays a bigger role than most people realize. A 2019 metabolomics study out of Chalmers University and Umla University found that paper-filtered coffee helps prevent type 2 diabetes, while boiled or unfiltered coffee does not deliver the same benefit. The split comes down to diterpenes, specifically cafestol and caweol, which survive in unfiltered methods like French press, boiled, and espresso. Orge and colleagues measured caffeine at just 12 milligrams per liter in paper-filtered coffee, compared to 939 in boiled coffee and nearly 2,450 in certain espresso samples. If you have the choice, paper-filtered coffee appears to be the better option for blood sugar. Genetics introduce another layer of variation through a gene called CYP1A2. Roughly half the population carries the fast metabolizer version, and the other half carries the slow version. Slow metabolizers hold caffeine in their system for 8 to 12 hours, while fast metabolizers clear it in 3 to 4. Behrens and colleagues reported in 2019 that slow metabolizers experienced greater glucose elevation at 60 minutes post-meal with caffeine. If you have ever noticed that an afternoon cup keeps you awake while your partner sleeps just fine after the same coffee, you may carry the slow variant, and you are likely more vulnerable to caffeine's glucose effects too. One more detail worth knowing. Arabica beans run about 1.2 to 1.5% caffeine, while Robusta beans pack nearly double at 2.2 to 2.7%. Choosing 100% Arabica gives you a real reduction in caffeine without needing to switch to decaf. Let me bring this back to where we started. Caffeine impairs glucose metabolism, and more than 20 years of randomized controlled trials confirm it. Among people with type 2 diabetes, daily glucose rises by 8%, and post-dinner glucose can climb as high as 26%. For the roughly 49 million Americans over 65 living with diabetes or prediabetes, those numbers are hard to dismiss. Walking away from coffee entirely, though, would mean abandoning a proven protective effect. 6 to 9% reduced diabetes risk per cup per day, driven by chlorogenic acid, polyphenol, and a long list of compounds that sharpen insulin sensitivity over time. Decaffeinated coffee provides nearly identical long-term benefits, which confirms caffeine as the problem actor and coffee itself as the solution. The walk, water, protein, then coffee protocol handles both sides of that equation. Post-meal walking trims glucose spikes by 12 to 22%. Staying hydrated reduces hyperglycemia risk by 32%. Eating protein before carbohydrates can slash glucose peaks by 29 to 73%. And drinking coffee after food instead of before it avoids the approximately 50% glucose surge that the University of Bath documented. 3 last thoughts to carry with you. First, caffeine's glucose effect gets worse as the day wears on. Lane's data tracked a rise from 9% after breakfast to 26% after dinner, which makes morning coffee the least damaging timing even within the protocol. Second, individual variation runs wide. Your CYP1A2 genotype creates up to a 4-fold difference in how long caffeine circulates in your body. So what works for someone else may not fit you at all. Third, for anyone who wants the long-term protection with almost none of the short-term risk, paper-filtered decaf coffee captures nearly the full protective effect while virtually eliminating the glucose spike. You do not have to give up your morning cup. You just need to be smarter about when and how it fits into your morning. Walk, water, protein, then coffee. 4 steps, all free, all grounded in published science. If this changed how you think about your morning routine, consider subscribing. We put out new evidence-based health content every week for adults who want to age well, not just age. I will see you in the next one.